And welcome back. It is the first segment of the second hour, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we were talking about ancient giants in North America. We started out by talking about the various stone mounds we found in Vermont, and on doing this study recently, I've become convinced that those stone mounds probably have giant skeletons beneath them if they haven't been disturbed, and they didn't look like they had been disturbed to me.
Yeah.
And we actually started to we were going to dig on one, but we didn't really get very far. We kind of pulled some stones out, but we were just like, wow, this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
It would have been an enormous task to get down to ground level from, even just with a part of it, because the stones were big. And I mean, they weren't too big to move, but they were too big to kind of grab with one hand.
Yeah.
So it would have been a lot of work. And
you basically have to dig a funnel.
Yeah, you have to dig a funnel because they're all rounded, and you have to pick each one up with both hands and kind of lift it up and hand it to somebody, and then he has to do something with it or whatever. It's just like it would have taken a long time, and that mound was probably 10 feet above the ground level at least, maybe even higher. They were pretty tall. But anyway, in the books that I've been reading, most of the mounds are made of dirt, but there are enough mounds made of what they called, artfully piled, unworked stone, and there's even some drawings in there. So like a lot of the people who are doing the research, when they find the articles or whatever, they find other things, and they'll find like sketches made of the people who dismantled the mound. And so there's sketches of how the stone looked of the mound and basically the way it was arranged. And I'm looking at those sketches. I'm like, that looks exactly like we were looking at in Vermont. Exactly like it. And what those mounds turned out to be is basically like a very heavy, cumbersome pile of stones on top of a grave that's below ground. So it's like because they often they didn't seem to bury them very deeply.
Yeah. It's almost like a marker.
Really. Yeah, it's both a marker, but and also if you bury something in a place where you can't really get it deep, in order to keep predators from digging it up and dismantling it.
Yeah, true.
You pile stones on top of it,
and even to deter people from digging it up if they knew that they were buried with
stuff,
artifacts, and,
right? And I mean, some of these stone mounds that they were talking about in this thing, they're like it was 150 feet around. Wow. Basically if you walk the circumference is 150 feet and it was 12 feet tall, and it was just tons of stones just thrown in this single pile, and they would dismantle all the stones. A lot of times they would kind of be quarrying them. They would be using them for some of the building projects. And so the wagon loads of the stone would be taken and there's nothing in it, but then they get down to ground level and they realize wait, there's something here. And then they would dig down and find graves, people had, somebody had piled stones on top of that thing just to make it, like you were saying, just as a deterrent. Yeah. Even for people, that's too many stones to grave robbing. This would take a year. So, so yeah, I was thinking about as I was reading that, I started to think about those mounds in Vermont. And I was like, oh my god, we were probably standing on top of giant skeletons down there under the ground somewhere.
Yeah, that's freaking badass.
Yeah, so if like Brett was saying, there's 150 of those stone mounds in that area. That sounds exactly like because they'll talk about how these mounds are all sort of in the same place, sometimes it's a single gigantic mound. Some of these that they discuss are really enormous, but more often it's a bunch of smaller mounds, all kind of in the same general area.
Yeah, one of the things that I really would like to do as a project over there would be to map the mounds, and the only way to do that
is to physically go. Yeah,
yeah, but you can't see it from satellite. There's a canopy.
Right. Yeah.
So you can't even hardly get a GPS signal.
Right, because there's a canopy.
So what you would have to do is basically bring surveying instruments.
Yeah.
And make measurements from you set up an instrument somewhere, and then you measure to a mound, and the direction. and the
Yeah,
degrees.
you establish a 0 point and then make
Right,
all your
and
measurements.
you start measuring from that point
Yeah.
to all the rest of them. But like, I became convinced while there that there was there was some type of
system,
design,
the arrangement. Yeah.
arrangement to these things because of the strange places that some of the mounds were put. Like the one I was talking about that was up against this massive, basically like a cliff.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's on a slope already, so you're on a pretty steep slope.
Yeah.
There's this massive fucking boulder. I call it a boulder. It's basically just a rock protrusion out of the side of the cliff.
Yeah.
There's a fissure, like there's a big crack that goes down the whole thing vertically. And this stone pile is literally like leaning up against this cliff, but it starts out at the top like nice and rounded and then just slopes down like very steeply.
Yeah.
To where even climbing it is like, man,
Yeah.
this is like, how did they do this?
Yeah.
You know, it was
Yeah.
freaking huge.
Yep.
Why would they put that there? Like, what was the point?
Right.
And I know after exploring that area, I know farmers didn't fucking do that.
Right.
Farmers don't have time to do that.
Right. Yeah. The idea that farmers like built these, like even those mounds, which are like they're at first glance they look kind of like just rocks thrown together, but they're not really that. Like they've been placed in such a way that where the whole thing is really solid. Like it.
And I've seen many piles of stone that were made by farmers.
Yeah.
And now there are some farms where, they probably went back later and made them artistic,
Yeah.
right? But that wasn't when they were desperately needing to farm.
Right.
But there's a lot of like rubble piles you'll see in the middle of fields, farm fields, and they're just that. It's very flat.
Yep.
They're not tall. They're sort of flat and there's just junk in there. There's big rocks. There's small rocks. They're just like
Right.
kind of
There's-
thrown in there. There's
definitely
maybe
doesn't-
a couple of stumps and shit.
Yeah, that's right. And it definitely doesn't look like anything you might call masonry, which is what these did.
Right. These look like they're like, what was the phrase you said? Artfully
Yeah, they were artfully placed.
piled. That's what they look like. And some of them were very symmetrical, very high. And then the slopes
Yeah, were steep, like
down
which
the-
meant that there was some kind of structure there because you like
right.
like they if you're just throwing rocks into a pile, you'll end up with a sort of an even slope all the way around. But these came down and like would get very steep,
Right.
like steeper than you could get by just randomly throwing rocks. Like you had to stack them.
So a really good example is Old Baldy. There's a park near where we live. Is it Lost Maples?
Baldy's is in Garner, isn't it?
Yeah, Garner State Park. Okay, in Garner State Park, there's this big mountain they call Old Baldy. Not really a mountain, but
An enormous
a big hill.
Yeah.
And on the top of the hill, I don't know if the park rangers started this or whatever, but people have been sort of picking up the rocks, the random loose rocks on the top of the hill and throwing them in this pile.
Right. It's kind of like you're like, I climbed to the top of Baldy and you put a rock on the pile.
Yeah. So there's an enormous pile of stone up there, but you can tell that it was just like the stones were just thrown on it.
Right.
And it's steep.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's not symmetrical. There's jagged parts. There's bulging areas.
Yeah.
There's
When you
just-
look at it, you see like a haphazard pile of rocks.
right, it's more pointed.
Yeah.
Right, because there's like you can get some big rocks at the top, but then some of them tumble down.
Yeah.
These are not pointed.
Right. These mounds were, and there was something homogenous about them. Like in other words, when you were like looking at them, even though it wasn't true, like it looked like all the stones were very kind of the same size, sort of the same.
Right.
Like they weren't, but like I said, it was artful. There was the way they had been put together.
They were placed.
Yeah, they were placed. They were carefully placed. So yeah, like there was enough of these in this book that I just was like, okay, those are undug giant graves.
That's freaking badass. Don't tell anyone.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that we can go there and
so keep this a secret, guys. Yeah. Don't tell anybody.
It's low hanging fruit, people. But okay, if you're in Vermont and you're that guy that we talked to and you live there at Smith Farm, right near it,
Yeah. Wait for us to dig them up.
Don't go dig any of that stuff up. But when you do, take pictures of it and don't show it to anyone, but post it on the internet everywhere.
That's right. That's right.
Don't fucking call a university or the Smithsonian.
That's right. The Smithsonian still claims that they don't have any giant specimens in their archives. So some of these, like anything with this, when you're reading, hundreds of cases or whatever, some of them stand out as being these are all anomalies, but some of them stand out as being anomalously anomalous, right?
How so?
Well, okay, most of the burials, they'll say, okay, there were implements with them that are standard, like they would find sort of stonework. They would usually say it was very fine, like that the arrowheads were like that the people who had made the arrowheads had obviously had some method of working the arrowhead of working the stone that was more sophisticated than even the best stoneworks that the modern natives did, right? But still, there were arrowheads and stone hatchets, and in other words,
right?
Not, like what people would consider to be like sort of primitive technology. But sometimes in the account, they will say things like, okay, so there are quite a few where they say that the skeleton was encased in copper. Okay, like that it was wearing copper armor. They will say like he was wearing full copper armor or whatever, but they describe like so he wasn't wearing a complete helmet like the Dark Knight or whatever, but he had a skull cap of copper that went over his head. Okay, and then it attached to something that covered his jaw that was also made of copper. And then he had shoulder plates, and then he had like a chest plate that was usually round and had all these symbols all over it.
Oh my God.
Okay. And then basically it went all the way to, so he was wearing full armor, but not medieval style like knights in armor where it was like where they looked like a robot.
Yeah.
He was fully protected on every part by copper, but he wasn't totally encased, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But that's anomalous. And then sometimes they'll mention that there were also metal weapons or things or whatever found with him, and that these appeared to be made of copper. Metal.
It comes from hell.
That's right. That there were metal things, tools, and weapons found along with them that appeared to be made of copper, but that it had been hardened in some way that was unknown.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this sort of undercurrent theme of like there's this unknown metallurgy that some of these people had, where they had a method of it's not bronze. Okay, it wasn't bronze because like when it is bronze, they'll say it. This is a bronze thing, that is copper mixed with tin or whatever. But sometimes it's pure copper, and yet it's hardened in such a way to make it like steel.
Yeah, which seems crazy that if they were thousands of years old, that they would be finding copper and not just green powder all over them.
Right. Now, sometimes they claim to have found iron and steel implements in there. A lot of times it was like they're rusted away, or that they had almost completely disintegrated or with rust or whatever. But they were like, this was clearly an iron something that he had right here. Sometimes they said that it looked like steel, but it couldn't be because it wasn't rusted at all, still shiny. Okay, one of those was a sword. It was like this. They said it was a beautiful, like what would be considered like a spada, like the Greek short sword that kind of went out and got wider at the end, right? So they said that like it looked like it was brand new.
Must have been drawn from the stone.
Yeah, made of space metal.
Yeah.
Then there are times when they talk about how like the giant was. Maybe there were no implements buried with him or whatever, but the way he was situated, so he was in this, not a sarcophagus, but basically they had encased him in stone. So there were flagstones on the flagstones beneath him, and then like more stones like stacked, like standing up to make a box around him, right? Like it wasn't actually a box, but they had sort of stacked up a masonry wall and then put a single enormous slab over the top of the whole thing. But that the skull of the skeleton, like underneath the skull or even resting against it, so standing like a headstone standing up behind it, was like this tablet that had hieroglyphs on it and shit.
Holy shit.
And they would always say like, and this has been turned over to the Smithsonian, which way we expect a translation, forthwith or whatever. And then, of course it never happens. Right. sometimes they'll sort of try to describe the glyphs. They'll say they had the appearance of hieroglyphs, sort of in the manner of maybe Chinese characters, but they're not Chinese characters. Sometimes they say that they're glyphs that don't look like anything they know at all. Right, series of curlicues and dots and shit like that. Like they're just like, this doesn't look like anything that we know. Huh. One of the more fascinating stories that I was thinking about, and this is the one I was starting to tell before the break, that there was a chief in the time of the colony, like so in the 1800s or whatever. He was still alive. He was enormous. He was a giant, and he was a warrior. Like he was a warrior chief, and he was kind of resisting the whole he was like screw these colonists. Like they were kind of fighting, but like he had this, like most of them, there was a sense of honor in the way the battle was done. Like they were ruthless in battle, but there was also honor, and like he was defeated, like soundly defeated by this one general, and like he took that as a sign from the Great Spirit that like this guy's right, like in the the old school way, like the sort of like. The trial by fire or whatever. So like this guy beat him so badass that he was like, okay, we'll do what you want. Like you won. Yeah. Like it wasn't really a surrender. It was just like, it was an honorable thing. Like, like good game kind of thing. Right. And in return, and like what was fascinating though, is that his symbol of this defeat, because like he came from this family of giants, they were all enormous. His whole family had been running the place for forever. And they all had this honor or whatever, and he was supposed to do this very an interesting thing where they had this symbol of their undefeated stature, and because this guy defeated him, he gave that to him, this symbol that he was like, this has been in my family for generations, right? It is a sign of where the source of our power or whatever. And he handed it to the guy, and like it was basically a small fired clay thing with symbols all over it, which turned out to be like cuneiform. It's a Sumerian tablet. Okay, there's still pictures of it. You could see it, and like eventually it was translated by somebody, and it was like it basically detailed the sale of a lamb to somebody else. It was like a receipt, okay? But his family had kept this thing for thousands and thousands of years, and he told the general when he handed it over to him that it was a symbol of the source of the power of his family. He said that long ago, white giants came amongst our people and like intermarried with us or whatever. And like, so he was basically saying like, I'm like, I'm a white person like you, but we had a giant mix in with our family like a long time ago. And like this tablet, he considered to be a sacred symbol of that union of his family with these demigods or whatever. And it was like a Sumerian cuneiform tablet.
Holy shit. What was that other thing you were talking about a while back where they found
the Fuente Bowl, the Fuente Magna Bowl?
Okay, yeah. That was in South America.
South America, really? Yeah. Like that thing can't exist. It's just like I have not been able to find any studies of any archaeologists on it, because they can't look at it.
Yeah.
Like that thing can't be there. It's like it's made of
covered in cuneiform.
Right. It's made of local materials. It's like it's got sort of figure artwork on it. It's a bowl. It's a big like what they call a libation bowl. So it's an enormous, think of a salad bowl, like a really shallow salad bowl. And it's made of local clay. It was obviously made and fired in South America. It's very old, so it was made and fired in South America a long, long, long fucking time ago. It has figures on either side of it that look like sort of the Viracocha guy, whatever, but all along the inside rim are on one side is like what's known as like the proto-Sumerian hieroglyphs, and then on the other side is cuneiform. And they basically say things like, this bowl is like dedicated to the goddess whatever, and whatever something, and 3 sheep and 4 goats or whatever, like it's like the same nonsensical translations that they make for all this stuff. But so archaeologists just don't even look. It's in a museum down there in Brazil, and they're just like, yeah, so this thing exists, and it's kind of a big fuck you to the global archaeological community, because normally that thing should be suppressed, because it can't, that it sort of destroys the entire narrative. But Brazil is kind of like, they don't really care about the they kind of are rebellious against the archaeological mainstream that comes from the United States and Britain.
Yeah.
They're just like, yeah, whatever.
So this little artifact is not. Nobody knows where it is, but there's a picture.
There was no indication that it's been lost. I think.
Okay.
I mean, there was a picture of it.
Yeah.
And then and like the guy, somebody translated it recently because it,
Okay.
you couldn't translate cuneiform a long time ago. So
Yeah.
So they know where it is.
It's
and
pretty badass.
Yeah, and that also can't exist. Like
Right.
they did talk about how like this one scholar guy like translated it, but that's all that's been done. He was like, yeah, so like so and so sold a lamb for so and so amount of money to so and so.
Yeah, that was probably like the marriage gift.
Yeah, yeah. I just found it fascinating that there's like this Sumerian. I mean, his family had carried it for thousands of years as like the symbol of their undefeated nature.
Right.
They had never been defeated. Like because as soon as the idea was once they had been defeated, they had to give it to whoever defeated them. So he still had it.
It's badass.
Yeah. So that brings up questions of like, the giants coming from Samaria?
Well, they're
Sumerians
you were talking about the horns too, because the
Right.
Sumerian carvings of the Anunnaki
Yes.
have the horns and
Well,
they were
Sumerians
giant.
Sumerians called themselves the black-headed people. Okay. A lot of people take that to mean that they think that means they are Nubian, that they were actually like black people, black-skinned. But it also could mean because like there's so many accounts of these giants being fair-skinned,
Yeah.
right? That there were two types: the fair-skins with the red hair, and the fair-skins with the dark hair. And they're both bearded. I'm thinking like black-headed people maybe they had curly black hair,
Yeah.
right? So these bearded figures, like usually it's the red-headed ones, the red-headed giants, which were the evil cannibal whatever.
Yeah.
The black-headed ones were described as being peaceful, as being good hosts, like that they would share their technology, that they were welcoming or whatever.
So
they
what are
were
you trying to say? Like the gingers were just like all
yeah,
fucked up?
gingers have no souls. That's what I'm trying to say. Not really. For whatever reason, the Indian legends say that the red-headed giants were invariably not always. That sometimes they were peaceable too, but if there was a cannibalistic, sort of warlike, sort of very dangerous version of the giants, they were always redheads.
Yeah.
And they would call them wildmen sometimes, like that they would show up and they would actually devolve, that they would lose all their technology and end up being like naked in the woods, just dangerous as hell. They're 12 feet tall, naked in the woods with a giant club, right? And they would eat anything. Some of the stories talked about how they consumed, like they consumed, just like the sort of the biblical idea of the Nephilim, like consuming everything.
Yeah.
The Indians talk about how like these giants would show up and then just begin to eat the forest, is what they said. But like I get the idea that they're clear cutting and just fucking like the forest is disappearing.
Yeah.
They're consuming it in a kind of industrial way.
Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense.
And then like, and then they invariably in those stories with the Great Spirit comes down and like wipes them all out with some kind of cataclysm, right? To allow the earth to heal or whatever. And there's also some interesting shit in there about the shrinking of things. So like post enormous cataclysm, the deluge, the Native Americans that were the ancestors of the ones that we're familiar with saw that like all these enormous animals and enormous people like either died off or like after the deluge was over, each successive generation was smaller and it happened very quickly. And they saw that as a blessing from the Great Spirit. Like that people were too big and lived too long before, and they were consuming the earth.
Yeah.
And so the Great Spirit said, well, that's not going to work, and came down and he like wiped a bunch of them out with a big flood. And then after that, everything started to shrink until everything was kind of the right size to not consume the earth.
Yeah.
Even though people now think we're consuming the earth. But I'm just like, no, we have to be 12 feet tall to consume the fucking earth. And none of us are 12 feet tall.
But we're building 12-foot tall machines that consume the earth.
I'm just saying, if you were 12 feet tall, you would be out there eating trees. Consuming the forest.
Yeah, but that's really badass, dude. Like,
Yeah.
so what are there are there other like artifacts discussed in the book that are still around to be observed and that you can remember?
Well, again, most of the contents of the books are like they're basically just giving you verbatim the contents of some article. Sometimes, like in Jim Vieira's book, they would say like, so we went and did the research on this for this or that, or because we were doing, what was the show that they did for a while, the Search for the Ancient Giants or whatever. They did a sort of an ancient alien style search for the giants that went on for a couple of seasons, where they basically went and investigated all these different cases where they thought there's a good chance that maybe some of this evidence still exists. And they did find some stuff. They found photographs of they never found any bones, but they found photographs of them that are like, this photograph is of a giant skull and it's enormous and you can see it. Or they would find the Smithsonian like artifact cards in their big catalog of like everything they have. They'd find the card that's like, received this from blah 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 township, skeleton plus steel sword or whatever the fuck, and then you hand it to the Smithsonian and say like let's see this artifact. And they're like, we can't find it. You're like,
it's too big.
Yeah,
we can't find that.
That's right. it's too big to mail.
Too big to mail. Yeah, they're notorious for not being able to find the biggest artifacts.
That's right. A lot of times in this actual articles, they'll say things like the skull and the jawbone or the femur or whatever, the skeleton or the skeletons or whatever artifacts are on display at X somewhere in the town, like at the courthouse or at the local men's club or in the barn of the farmer who discovered it or whatever. And they say that like that people are flocking there to go look at it, that hundreds have already come through to see it. But that's an article that was written in 1857. And so you don't know what happened after that. There's no kind of follow-up. Sometimes they'll imply follow-up, like they'll say that they're on display right now and everybody's looking at them. There are people coming from University of X or from the Smithsonian or whatever to collect some of the evidence, or they have already come and collected it. There's also some really interesting stories about where somebody will find something and the Smithsonian agent, whoever he is or whatever, will purchase it for $10,000, which is like $1 million. I mean, that's a lot of money back then. $10,000 in 18 whatever is a fortune. So the Smithsonian will purchase it and then call it a fraud. Right? So wait, you just purchased a fraud for like $1 million. Give me a fucking break, right?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And then they're like, well, this is obviously a hoax. We're gonna go just dispose of it.
So this goes back to this guy that you were talking about that was running the Smithsonian Institution at the time.
Yeah,
or
Aldous
around this
Huxley,
time,
whatever his name is. Yeah, like he decided that. I'm not sure what his motivations were, but it's clear that he decided that he was going to get rid of this whole idea of some kind of archaic mound builder culture that was distinct from the Native Americans. It appeared to be that he was doing this because he was trying to like sort of elevate the Native Americans, but it doesn't. I'm not really sure if that's exactly.
I kind of like also think about it in terms of at the time, the Europeans when they were settling here, like believed they were the height of mankind and everything, and everybody else was a savage. Mm-hmm.
A lot of the articles,
black people were not really human, or not really people, and there was just this sort of general idea amongst the elite,
right? That we're like civilized and everybody else,
like
we're the peak, the pinnacle,
God's chosen,
manifest destiny, or we're awesome,
right?
Yeah.
So I can see it starting out that way, like you have this whole sort of society built on where the elite is trying to control things and run things, and they build it in a certain way where these people have divine right of kings and these people are the chosen, and so you have to do what they say and all that kind of shit. And then you show up somewhere and you start discovering that there was an ancient, totally different human, much bigger than you, by the way, and had technology that you don't understand at the time. A lot of the articles start out that way, like it is apparently like we are not the, like they'll say something like apparently we are not the greatest race to ever occupy these lands, like because giants, right? It'll say things like that, like there you can see most of the time that their ideas of the well, not always, that their ideas about the local Indian population
sometimes it's just like you read it and you're like, man, wow. Like when you're reading it, this the stuff that they say about the natives is like it's gross, right?
Yeah.
But it isn't always like that. Most of the time they give them respect. They'll talk about their legends and everything like that and how they consulted them to ask questions about this. Sometimes it's just, it's really negative. But what you always see is that the natives themselves are saying, no, that's not us.
Yeah.
So this is why I wonder about the motivations of this guy. Because it's like he's sort of depicted as like trying to elevate the native, like to get rid of this idea that they didn't do this, they couldn't have. That isn't what people were doing. That's not what people weren't saying the natives couldn't have built these mounds. What they were doing is saying the natives said they didn't build these mounds.
Right.
Right? But this guy was like saying you're all racists for saying that the natives couldn't have built these mounds.
Right.
Right? Which is kind of like that still happens today. Like when, even the ancient aliens concept where people were like, I wonder if aliens were involved with the construction. They're like, you're a fucking racist. You think these people couldn't have done it?
Yeah.
And we're like, well,
with their butt flaps.
Yeah.
Like,
those
wait a
people
minute.
told us that they didn't do it. So aliens. But so that makes me wonder about, because really the one disrespecting the natives is him. He's saying they're lying.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, like the
Which is the same disrespect that they have towards like all of these ancient cultures and their writings, which say
Yeah, they're
whatever the
myths.
writings are saying, they're like, oh, they're myths.
Right.
They were just lying.
Right. Their forefathers built these things. They forgot about it and then told themselves it was God's. It's obviously bullshit. Like that's incredibly disrespectful.
Right. And then when you say, well, wait a minute, what about they say that these other people built it? Oh, you're
you're
a bigot.
racist. You think they could. No, it's like, no, dude, all the racism is coming from you. Like it never even occurred to me to say they couldn't do it. I'm just like, they said they didn't. But like me saying that makes you think that I'm saying that they couldn't do it because they're savage. That's coming from your brain, not mine.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I fucked up with the clock and like I clicked the button, but I didn't have the app selected, so it didn't actually start the clock.
Oh, okay. All right. So we got to take a break.
Again.
Again.
Wasn't that like 15 minutes ago that we just No, it was 30 minutes ago.
So we'll come back for the last segment and probably continue to talk about this because there's still.
Yeah, this is bad. What is the name of the book?
It's.
I know you gave it already once.
Yeah, let me give it again. It's right here. I got it. So the one I'm reading right now it was referenced in his book. It's called The Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America, which is awesome. But Vieira's book is called Giants on Record: America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds, and the Smithsonian Files.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, the last chapter of his book, I'll just say this real quick. The last chapter of his book is phenomenal. Like the entire book is good. It's really good. Like he gives all these accounts. He sort of orders them very well and kind of gives you a good overall picture. But the last chapter is where he gives you the strangest cases, and then they speculate on like what's going on here. What's really going on here? They speculate on the whole like why is there a cover up? They speculate on like what really were these people. That's where they start giving which we're going to talk about in the next segment about the electromagnetic frequency stuff and carbon dioxide and like why everything was gigantic so there's a lot of great stuff in the last chapter.
There's also a podcast called The Unexplained, and
Yes.
there's an episode on there where he gets Jim Vieira on as a guest while like it's in the time when Jim Vieira and his partner were writing the book, and it's both of them that get on there.
Yeah.
It's a really good.
Is that Andrew Collins and is it Hugh Newman or Andrew Collins with him?
I can't remember.
Yeah, one of those guys. And yeah, that was a really good episode.
Yeah, good episode. So if
Yeah.
you want to get
Howard Hughes with
hear from the
Unexplained.
authors, they talk about the book and everything that they're doing too. So check that out.
I've also noted, you know, the first videos that he made where like he gives the whole presentation at the very end, he like kind of flips out and goes off on this like sort of kind of semi-political thing or whatever. He has dropped that entirely. Because he's like because all the stuff he was saying at the time, he's like, so back in the day there were the people and they obviously were like very advanced and they now he doesn't think that anymore because he sees that like some of them are cannibals and like he has kind of dropped that whole spiel. It's very interesting, like that he is a true like scientifically he's true to it that he sees the evidence against and he goes with it.
Yeah. That's
it's
good.
really cool. Yeah, because I mean, at first he had these kind of, he sort of like threw all these concepts that he had that were basically political and social. You know, from modern political social bullshit, he kind of threw them onto there, and you could see him like kind of flip out on that shit at the end of some of his earlier stuff. But now he doesn't talk about that stuff at all. He doesn't even go there because there's all this evidence against it that he's discovered.
So I wonder how his banned TED Talks video will fare now that he's released this book.
Oh, I don't know. I have it on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause when they got banned, I went and downloaded them and fucking posted it on mine.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. I asked him first too. I was like, hey, I've got I actually downloaded, because I live in the boondocks. I downloaded your video to watch it. And when I found out it was banned, I'm like, I'm going to upload it to myself. And he was like, oh yeah, go ahead. Like, and I did the same thing with Graham Hancock's and Richard Sheldrake's banned versions. So like all three of those are on my YouTube channel, and they're on thousands of people's
What's
YouTube
your
channel.
What's your YouTube channel? You gonna throw that out there?
It's just Tsurugi is the name. I don't know how to tell people to go there. Like, it's just
Tsurugi, TSURUGI.
Yeah, that's right. It's Tsurugi Mazamune. It basically means sword.
All right, we're gonna take a break. Snake. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, scriptards and all the rest of you. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, final segment of the final hour, talking about giants in North America, Jim Vieira's book, and his source books.
Yeah, it's Giants on Record from Jim Vieira and the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America.
Yeah.
Which is the source book that I basically went through his references and looking for another, because I was like, not enough giants. So I finished his book and I'm like, it's not enough. Need more giants. So I went through his references and found I was like, well, the Encyclopedia sounds like a really big book, so I'll buy that one. It's probably got a lot of giants in it.
Hell yeah.
And it does. It's
a giant book of giants.
It's a gigantic book of giants. And it's really, it is like, so far there has been very little text in that one that's actually original to the writer. Basically the guy is just like making an encyclopedia of all of every record he found of anybody finding anything related to giants. It's badass.
That's
And
fucking
it's
badass.
arranged by state. So it's like starts out with New York and then it goes to Ohio. You know, like he basically is working his way down the states that have the most giants to the least. So, you know, I guess it's Ohio then New York, because Ohio had the most. Like it was, and that's of course where the Serpent Mound is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like there's just fucking mounds and giants everywhere in that state. Just thousands of them were found there. Another thing, I just remembered this in the very first part of Vieira's book, and maybe I can screenshot this somehow and put it in the show notes. They have like a Google Maps. Like, you know how you can go on Google Maps and you can sort of put things in there, like you can put addresses in and little icons for them.
Yeah.
Like they have a Google Maps thing where every single account of a giant discovery, they have put it on Google Maps, and it's just like the whole United States is covered. I mean, it's just like there are thousands of them all the way across. It's badass looking.
Can you download that for your Google Earth or is it Google Maps?
Probably it does. Yeah, probably you can download it. It's like
because like with Google Earth, you can get these.
Right, the KMZ files,
KMZ files like full
Well,
of
with Google
locations.
Earth, you basically just, if it's a public map, you can just join it, and you'll be able to see it. Let's see. I can look in here, but he basically was talking about. He was like, so and so researcher did this for us, put it together for us, and he had a picture of it. And I was like, holy shit! And he's got blue ones for the black-headed ones and the red ones for the red hairs, right? And they're just like everywhere, just all over the entire nation. Yeah, it was really cool looking.
All right. Well, we should find where they are nearby us. And
yeah, there have been a lot of finds in Texas. Like in his book, I haven't gotten to Texas yet in the encyclopedia, but in Jim Vieira's book, he documents finds in Texas it's interesting because like I said, like a lot of the burials don't seem to have been advanced in any way, but some of them do appear to have been advanced in and sometimes advanced in ways that are not really understood. Like, in other words, you can tell that there is stuff involved with this burial that are mysterious. Like I was getting to the some of the metal artifacts that they found. Like, they found copper ones that are strangely hardened, where they said the copper had the strength of steel. But they've also, like I mentioned, the one sword that was like shiny, like it was still brand new. Okay, they found the tablets with writing on them, like implying that these people had a written language.
Yeah.
There was one account, and this was in the encyclopedia. Well, okay, there's two accounts that I can remember that were like this. Basically, on one of them, the guy was excavating a mound, and so usually when they do the mound excavations, they go to the top of it and they start digging down right in the middle. They basically they lower a shaft in the very center of it,
Yeah.
right? Because they're usually conical, so they go to the very top of the cone and they start digging down, and that's how they distinguish all the layers. Once they figure out what the layers are, they will dig trenches that go down to the layer they want to get to. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the mounds are enormous, so they dug a trench that was 150 feet long on the north side, and then and it was like 12 feet deep, and then they did another one on the west side that was like 75 feet long, and it was 40 feet deep or whatever, and like they're enormous mounds. But there was one mound, and I think this one was in Ohio, where they were doing the excavation, and they had already found a bunch of artifacts. They had found enormous skeletons, but they abandoned the excavation attempts because they got freaked out by the hollow sound that their picks were making when they were digging.
Oh man.
And so they started to imagine that they were standing over a very cavernous, and that potentially they would, with another strike of the pick, it would break and they'd fall in.
Oh my god.
So they stopped digging, and that's where it ends. And I'm like, wait, like no. Like they never dug anymore.
Yeah, let's go back with GPR.
Like go down and dig in or something. Yeah, so that that indicates that the earthen mound was actually put on top of some other stone structure of some kind.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
And I had started to talk about the clay. So they had some way, like when they didn't use stone, they had this yellowish clay that they fired, and like the people, the accounts will talk about how there are pillars that they would fire these like 12 foot tall, or yeah, like a foot tall and a foot in diameter cylinders of clay, and stack them up to make columns. And that the columns would be in there holding the ceiling of fired clay up, right?
Wow.
And the idea that you could do something like that, like basically make an enormous clay, like fired clay, I don't know, container that would then withstand like thousands of years of Mississippi rain and just, wherever they find it. That's astonishing to me. Like, so the yellow clay must be something special, because anytime they talk about hardened clay, it's always yellow. And they always say like, it didn't come from here. We don't have any yellow clay.
This is another one of those things that we've talked about before, where there are all these accounts from newspaper articles or wherever, different accounts written by journalists from different places and many, many years apart from each other. And so many of them have the same strange elements to them that it's like, it's hard to imagine. Okay, I guess it would be.
Some people take that and say, like, see how they're all the same? That means they're all hoaxes. And I'm like, well, like, how did this small town over here in the West Coast know about this small town's newspaper hoax?
I guess the more legitimate point would be at the same time. Like during the same year, there's like cities or little towns from places that are far apart that are putting out stories of these discoveries right around the same time period.
Right. So
when it's very unlikely that they would have had communication between them about it.
Because the argument against the effect, like look how they all say that that the jawbone was so big that they put it around the jaw of the biggest guy there, and it was or how they all say that that the bones crumbled to dust, and they point to this as the idea that like this was an ongoing 100-year-long newspaper hoax, right?
Right.
Whenever reporters didn't have anything to write about, they would write this hoax story about finding giants. The problem with that is there's many problems with it, but the two main ones that I see are most of the vast majority of the stories referenced real people that lived in the town that were of high reputation. You do not, as a newspaper, write hoax stories naming like high reputable people and get away with that. Like that would infuriate these reputable people, right? So that kind of belies the whole hoax, the idea that it's just a newspaper hoax, because like that would ruin the newspaper to like reference the judge and the doctor and like the guy that ran the Freemasons, like that would destroy the newspaper if they were like putting lies about those people in a,
right.
I mean, that would just,
that's a good point. Yeah.
The other strong evidence against it is like, so yes, you could say like, well, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, like everybody knew about the mound builder giants, blah, blah, blah. So you could newspaper hoax it. But like in the beginning, like the early 1800s, when all these stories started to appear all over the United States in all these little small towns at close to the same time, that's the time when it is weird for it to be a simultaneous hoax, right? Like all the stories were consistently like that. They like, so.
Okay. So you didn't start out with one giant hoax, right? Newspaper hoax that had all these characteristics, and then one that had totally different weird characteristics,
right.
and another one somewhere else that had completely different.
And they eventually consolidated.
Yeah,
right.
no, they all start out with the same strange characteristics.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And what really it appears to be like, kind of like that the Lincoln speech that he wrote for Niagara. Everyone knew.
Right.
It was common knowledge about, it's only very recently that this has kind of been suppressed to the point and like removed from our education and like completely, so that to where people find it strange, where they're like, what, giants? Like, I didn't heard anything about any giants. And so it's easy for them to reject it. Well, in the, like all the way up to the 1950s, it was common knowledge that the mounds of the United States were full of like bones of Native Americans, but also bones of giants that were much older than those apparent burials, and that many of them had strange characteristics, like like full copper plate armor and symbols that were unknown, and like sometimes metallurgy that hinted at unknown science. And so I talked about the mound where the guy, they dug down and then they got scared about this hollow sound, right? There was one where in this particular one, I think the guy was basically plowing, and he was plowing a field that his family had owned for a long time, but they had never worked it. It was a pain in the ass, full of rocks and shit, right? But he had finally decided, like, I'm gonna go down there and I'm gonna fucking plant something in that field. So he goes down there, he's trying to plow it.
Go get your root twin,
yes, right.
taters and
It's
bacon,
like that.
plow that
Like,
field.
yeah, it's a lot like that. Like, what did he call that field? I had a funny name for it. Yeah, son of a bitch is what it was called.
Son of a bitch.
The name of the field was Son of a Bitch. Like each successive generation had plans. Like, I'm gonna plant rutabaga down there. It'll grow great amongst all them rocks. Anyway, this guy was plowing this field, and he noticed that his plow, like, sort of kind of runs across this flat stone, like a big one, right? So he's plowing or whatever, and it just it glides across this flat stone, down to the ground. So he ends up pulling up a slab, and it. I was expecting, like most of the stories where there's a slab on top, for it to just be like a sarcophagus kind of deal. No, he pulls it up. It says he pulls it up, and it opened a vault. Okay, an enormous black space that they couldn't see the bottom of, and that he could not get into because of this horrible air was coming out of it. In other words, the air was stagnant and stale from being in there for 10,000 years or whatever, right? Like, even if there's nothing, like, obviously there's not going to be anything rotting in there anymore, but if air just doesn't move and it stays trapped, it can be deadly. It can just turn into toxic gas, right? So he opens it up and he's like, and then they can't get in, okay? But all they can see is this yawning black chasm. It's deep, like really deep. Like they couldn't get light to go to the bottom of it, and he couldn't kind of get close to it. He's trying to hold his lantern down in there or whatever, but he couldn't get close enough. Every time he tried to lean down in there, he would start coughing and shit, and he'd almost fall in, right? So eventually, he fashions this long, like, rake sort of thing. He gets the rake and he makes this long thing where he can kind of stand away from the hole. He gets the rake all the way down to the floor in there, and he starts scraping, and he pulls it up, and it pulls up bones that are enormous, like human bones that are enormous. So they're like, okay, this is some kind of tomb for a giant, but they don't know that. Okay, there are bones down in there, but is it a tomb? Is it a prison? You know.
Yeah.
Eventually, somebody has the idea. He enlists some help from his neighbors, or whatever, and all the most prominent people in the town show up. And like one of them gets the idea to like sort of make a torch. They get some hay and they kind of tie it together and they dip it in pitch and they light it and they drop it down in there. Okay. Now they can see because there's a little bit of light from the thing burning on the ground down there, and they see that it has multiple rooms that it's basically made of extremely finely worked, very large stones, and then there are multiple doorways that go into like other chambers, but they never can go down in there because the air is so horrible. Okay,
Must
so
be a
that's
huge place,
right? That's and it stops there. I'm like, so they never went in? Like, you know, again, I'm like wondering, like, what? Okay, there's a
freaking drive-by journalists even back then, man.
yeah,
Damn it.
but I just have to wonder, like, did they never go in there? I mean, like, you could tell that a lot of times when people find stuff like this in these stories, some kind of gold fever hits them, like this like, oh my God, there's going to be ancient treasure, and they just destroy everything trying to find gold and shit. Okay,
Yeah.
there seemed to be that starting to happen with the rake thing. Like he was just willing to jam something down in there and just like mess, you know, just like rake it around in there and fuck shit up or whatever to pull up what, you know, maybe he's hoping for necklaces to be dangling from it or something, but he pulls up bones, and that kind of makes him chill out a bit because all of a sudden now you're dealing with dead stuff, right? Like enormous dead giants, and you're like, okay, I don't want to have that thing haunting me or whatever. They would get this sort of reverence for the site because they're like, okay, this is the tomb of a powerful ancient giant. So they stopped the gold fever, but then they couldn't ever get in there. But they described this below ground enormous place, and then they just stopped with that. And I'm just like, wait, like.
Yeah, that's just where the journalism stopped.
Right, that's what I mean. The story
okay,
stops
so
there. And they also said that there were hieroglyphic symbols engraved into the walls of some of the. Okay, so we're talking about like this looks like Egyptian style or something.
So here's another thing like that I've come across where people, when something is found on their property, a lot of times like they want that shut up, like no more publicity.
Yep.
So in one case, a friend of mine had some excavations going on his property, and they found a skeleton.
Yeah.
And they had the university come out, and they collected it. First, the sheriff came out.
Right.
Checked it out. Then they got the university.
Sheriff's like, nope, that's pretty old.
And they got the university to come out. Yeah.
If he's murdered, it's beyond our jurisdiction.
Statute of limitations.
That's right. Statute of limitations ran out about 5,000 years ago.
So they had the university come out. They collected the bones. They took it and did a study on it, and then they brought it back, and they're like, yeah, this is like 900 something years ago, and whatever, blah, blah, blah.
And they also told him it was like over 7 feet tall. That's what he said anyway.
And and then after that, it was like, no more.
Yeah. Done.
Close it up. Like, that was too much fucking shit to deal with for this property owner that wanted privacy.
Right. Privacy.
So you know.
Yeah.
I'm sure that is the case in a lot of.
Yeah,
a lot
absolutely.
Of these situations. So you have journalists, you have all these people coming out.
I don't doubt that things continue to happen with this discovery. I'm just saying the story stops there.
Yeah, I know.
And I was like, WTF? Like, come on.
And then the other thing is, a lot of people like our cousin, Richard Saunders. We found that silver mine on the property.
He told us the legend of it, and he's like, well, it might be out there somewhere.
Yeah,
and
we find it, and then we go down in there.
Yeah,
we tell down into it.
We start making plans to like clear it out so we can get down in there. And he's like, nope.
Yeah, and he finds out. He's just like, leave it alone.
Yeah, don't.
And of course, that's understandable because he doesn't want us to get lost and die. But the point is that some people don't. They're not interested. They're not curious.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, just leave it. And,
I'm like, dude, you have an ancient silver mine on your property. Yeah. How can you not?
Well, there's a cave up there that the Vikings built.
Yeah.
But old man Jenkins won't let you go up there.
Right. We're looking for like a stone circle or a standing stone or something. Well, nothing like that around here. just that cave up there that the Vikings built. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. And then he gives us these directions. Holy crap.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, people just don't. A lot of people are just not interested. Like, they know about it and they're just like, yeah, not interested. So all I'm trying to say is I'm doing the opposite of the script hard and saying that it could be real, and people just are not interested, and then people forget. You know, they forget about it.
Yeah. Well, the farmer was obviously extremely excited by the find, and then he calls all the like the town. You know, like he was probably, because he owned this enormous farm, he was probably like one of the wealthiest people in the town. But he calls the doctor and he calls the judge and just all the high people in the town. So like he gets them all there and like is getting advice from them or whatever. So obviously the story continues from where the newspaper article drops off. He probably also called the reporter, or somebody did. The reporter's like, wait, the judge and the doctor, they're going out where? And then he goes out there. You know, and then he makes up a hoax or whatever the script
he just makes it all up.
Yeah, the farmer was like, "How do I get this boulder out of my field?" And the reporter's like, "Giant found in field." It's so stupid. So that was the most fascinating circumstance of burial that I could find, and there wasn't even a mound there. I mean, like at least, or maybe he had plowed it away or whatever, but he was basically just plowing a field full of rocks and shit.
Yeah,
I think the guy does say at the end that it was a known ancient habitation because there was like pieces of pottery, you know, just stuff was always found in that area that indicated it was. But again, it's indicating habitation by Native Americans.
Yeah, later peoples.
Yeah.
But again, we often pick the same places.
Right. Yeah. A lot. It was actually mentioning that in the encyclopedia that a lot of times the mounds are underneath houses.
Yeah.
I'm like, you built your house on an actual Indian mound, like, you know, like that's why there's so many stories like, yeah, this house is built on an ancient burial ground. I'm like, why would you fucking build your house on top of a cemetery? It was a hill. It was like the highest place.
Come
on,
little high spot in the middle of the farm. Yeah,
I can't imagine that. I don't know. I'm not gonna put my house on top of a thing full of giant bones.
Yeah, but if you don't know, like you didn't excavate it first, you're just like, oh.
Well, they had to dig it. They had to dig for some kind of. Well, maybe not. I guess people didn't always put a slab in, but like if you're gonna pour a concrete slab, you got to dig down, right? And like you start finding trinkets and bones and shit.
They were probably doing pier and beam.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that's interesting, like when you were asking about the dating of these mounds, a lot of times they will try to indicate the great age of the mound by talking about the trees that were on top of it.
Yeah.
That there were these enormous, like 4-foot trees, right? And that when they dug, those have been cut for wood or whatever, so the stumps were left. Then they removed the stumps when they were doing the excavations and found beneath them that there were pieces and bits of evidence that there were even older, also 4-foot wide trees that had been there before that. Like, so that, you know, multiple generations of enormous trees on top of the mounds. That was one of the ways they would try to indicate its great age. Sometimes they would talk about, you know, the typical, like, these two boys, like, go out in the woods, right? And they find a giant skeleton wrapped up in the roots of a tree. Like the tree had fallen over in a storm and picked the...
Oh, man.
That's why I always check trees that fall over.
Too.
I'm like, well, this got a fucking giant sarcophagus caught in its roots.
I do the same thing, dude. Like, I walk around the backside to look at the dirt underneath the tree and see, like, how many arrowheads are sticking out of this
because,
thing.
like, you know that no one's looked in that dirt for a long time because that tree's been there the whole time. And sometimes people would find, like, a skull just hanging on one of the roots, and you're just like, how come that never happens to me? Like, how? I've looked at thousands of trees that have fallen down and never found anything like that.
Yeah, Joe, our old boss, like when we were clearing, told a story about how he was driving the skid steer and got these huge hydraulic shears and, you know, looks like a beetle pinchers or whatever on the front of the skid steer. Go to cut a tree, and sometimes you can't cut all the way through the stump, but you can pry it up. Like you get the shears as far closed as they can get around this massive tree, and then you start prying on it and you can rip it out of the ground. And he did this around this big ass tree and like rips it up and lifts it up with the skid steer, and there's just a freaking hole underneath, and it was just black, like down in there. And he was like, I just set that tree back down on that hole. I was like, no, dude, no. Where was that?
Yeah.
Yep, he just freaking opened up the entrance to something and just set it back down.
Uncurious people.
Yeah, I know.
How could you not just fucking climb down in that hole?
They found a cave one time, and I was like, where is it? Take me to it.
Yeah.
And he showed me where it was, and the next day I showed up with my freaking like
gear.
Climbing rope and all this stuff, and like I was like, all right, because he didn't want me to go into it. And
You're like, I'm off the clock.
I show up with all the climbing gear, and I'm like, here's the end of the rope. It's 150 feet long.
That's right.
So you can hold it. And if you get scared, you guys can pull me out of here. And I go down in there.
If it goes slack, don't come after me.
Yeah, I went and explored it, and it was pretty big, but not 150 feet long. But he was just like, when I came out of there, he's just like, you're crazy, man. Crazy. Can't believe that.
People have been exploring caves for a long time, man. We had to live in them back in the day.
Yeah, and that's, pretty much all the stories of people going off and showing back up and being geniuses. They went into a cave at some point.
Right.
Came out and they were fucking
They
geniuses.
came out in a cave in like Untersberg in Austria or something like that. Disappeared into a cave in Rochester, Vermont. Showed up in Untersberg. So one of the things that he goes through in the last chapter of the book of Giants on Record, he talks about. He's sort of they're asking the question, where did these giants come from? There's a lot of indication that they came from ancient Middle East, right? So he does kind of go through some of the evidence. Like he talks about, like there are people that sort of like look at this solely from the perspective of like the Nephilim from the Bible, right? So he references some works that people have done where basically they're saying like the Bible says that there were these giants that were the Nephilim or the Raphaim or the Anakim, right? He lists off. He's like, yeah, so there's a lot of giants in the Bible, and he lists off the names of every single one of them. It's like an enormous list. Amorites and Canaanites, and he goes through the whole thing from A to Z. And all of these peoples were enormous, according to the Bible. And he says that that people have done a lot of research trying to figure out, did some of those people, those giants, come straight here, right? In other words, like he says that there is some interesting evidence pointing to the idea that when Moses is, after the Exodus, when Joshua was sort of like tearing through Canaan and like destroying everything, that some of those giants saw what was happening and understood that even though these were like little people, that they were going to win because they had something on their side that was kicking everybody's asses. So they just left and they ended up in North America. One of the interesting things, like, okay, you remember that there's this sort of, we kind of make fun of it sometimes, like, maybe when we're talking about flat Earth or whatever, but the idea that the world is held up on the back of the shell of an enormous turtle.
Yeah.
That imagery, and like he doesn't say anything about this in his book. I just made the connection myself. Like he says that that the Native Americans, or that they talked about how their fathers or their forefathers or whatever, like that they called the Americas Turtle Island. Okay, even though they knew it wasn't an island, they because it was surrounded by seas on all sides, like it was sort of isolated from.
Yeah.
Even though it was enormous, it was isolated from everywhere. Like it wasn't connected by land to any of the other land in the world. They talked about it like it was an enormous island, Turtle Island. So the picture of the turtle holding up the world. When you take that picture and you think about it in context of like a possible prehistoric, extremely advanced race of enormous people who were building some kind of like sacred structures all across this continent that were harnessing some kind of subtle energies that were maintaining whatever it was that they had in the environment previous to the end of the Ice Age. The idea of the turtle holding up the world.
Yeah.
It becomes a little clearer and more interesting, right?
That's cool.
So like when they're discussing where they came from, he says, so some of them may have come from the Middle East, but it's also obvious that, the early colonists were showing up and seeing Indian chiefs that were enormous, okay? But that slowly faded out. Like some of them held on for a long time, but there aren't any left now. There's not, in modern times, there are not like 8-foot Indians.
Right.
Okay. But they obviously did exist even all the way up to the 1700s. Okay. Even the early 1800s. So he talks about how, like, in combination with various things, plus the legends of the Indians themselves, that almost everyone was enormous before, or very small. Okay. Before the end of the Ice Age, that there was something about the Earth that just made things huge. Yeah. Right.
Or there's
And-
something about the Earth now that shrunk things.
Right. There's something missing is what I guess the idea is what they said, that the Great Spirit took it away. But so they reference some stuff from the University of Kyoto in Japan, how they had done all these studies with EMF, electromagnetic fields, specifically ELF EMF, which is extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields, that they noticed that when subjecting an organism of any kind, animals or whatever they were doing it to pulsed ELF EMF fields, that the animal would just spontaneously begin to grow, even if it was, mammals have have an early growth cycle and then they stop, right? I don't think there's any mammals that just continue to grow like fish or whatever. Yeah. But that when they would subject these animals to this pulse field or whatever, that they would start to put on mass and not get fat, but they would just get bigger. The bones would increase in size. So they started to look at this like on the cellular level, and they saw that like somehow these fields, these pulsing fields, were causing all this bone growth to take place, and then the body correspondingly is adding on muscle and putting on tendon and shit, and like the whole thing is basically just increasing in size, right? So he references this paper that they published on it. I'll basically just read a little bit from this. It says, it is possible that electromagnetic fields exert an effect on skeleton size via alteration of the proliferation and activity of bone cells. In support of this hypothesis, pulsed EMF stimulation has been used clinically for more than 25 years for the treatment of patients with delayed fracture healing and non-unions. Furthermore, a substantial number of in vitro studies have shown that EMF have positive effects on the proliferation and activity of bone cells. Let's see. They also state that exposure to an extremely low frequency electromagnetic field was associated with an increase in animal body weight. So they propose that the enormous sizes of some of the flora and fauna, the plants and animals during the age of the dinosaurs, was facilitated by powerful ELF EMF coming from natural sources, and may also have been acting in the more recent past with the Pleistocene megafauna. Okay. And then another part, they say that certain kinds of magnetic fields have an effect on mitochondria. It is found that energy, activity, and cell respiration in mitochondria that were exposed to a magnetic field increased by factors of 1.5 and 1.3 respectively compared with the control group. It seems that mitochondria are activated by magnetic fields and thereafter provide more ATP to some organelles than in the cells of an organism. Promotion of ATP synthesis by a magnetic field would provide the energy to maintain a larger body size. That is, organisms would be able to use magnetic energy as well as other forms of physical energy to maintain a large body. Okay, so this kind of, that's very interesting because like there's one of the main arguments that I guess the establishment science or what mainstream science has against the concept of enormous humans is that it just wouldn't work. They say
the bone structure or whatever.
Right, you increase the size and eventually it starts to fail because it can't hold itself up, right? But there's also the same problem with dinosaurs. Like there are some dinosaurs that are just too big, like the Alamosaur that was discovered in Texas, that they've got a full skeleton of one in the museum in Dallas. It's either
no, they only have like a few freaking vertebrae of that thing in Dallas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you mean the entire rest of it's extrapolated?
I believe so, but it's I could be wrong, but I remember seeing the actual like the bones on display were just like this massive freaking thing, but it's only just like
a piece of vertebrae,
a piece of the backbone. Huge.
But they had the full skeleton of the thing in there, so I guess remember it covered went across the entire room almost. The head was way over there, and the tail was way over here. But you could be right. They could have extrapolated the rest of the skeleton from a few fragments. But I thought they had found an entire one.
Maybe they did. I don't know. But anyway, that's not the point.
Yeah, and somewhere in South America, they found another one that's even larger. They call the Titanosaurus. I mean, it acts absolutely enormous.
Right.
And already
this could be the cause.
Right. Already with things like Brontosaurus size, they're really too big. That like. You have the problem of like, how did the brain talk to the tail? Like it would take too long for the signals to get there. And like, there's all this stuff they're just so huge. It doesn't seem like they would be like, what, that they would be actually, it would be detrimental.
Yeah. Structurally detrimental.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but the fact is that there were enormous creatures during the age of the dinosaurs. And then again, during the Pleistocene, before the Holocene, at the end of the Ice Age, there were enormous creatures in North America. Megafauna is they're called. They're mammals.
And why couldn't there be enormous people too?
Right. I mean, if there were 600-pound beavers, there could have been 600-pound people. You know, that were not sumo wrestlers or whatever. But basically, the paper is basically saying that, like, if you have I guess the simplest way to put it is if there is a greater energy environment, you know, in the form of like lots of extremely low frequency magnetic fields, and we do know that not too long ago the Earth's overall magnetic field was much stronger, like 10 times stronger as it is now. So if you had like naturally occurring ELF, EMF, electromagnetic, you know, low frequency electromagnetic fields, that would create an energy environment that biological organisms would be able to take advantage of.
Yeah.
And all the way down to the mitochondrial level, where just the mitochondria have a greater ability to do stuff because there's more energy in the environment.
Yeah.
Right? That's fascinating. He also talks about the idea that he's like, we know that there was a much higher carbon dioxide amount in the atmosphere that in some cases it looks like it was almost double. Like, so if we have 400 parts per million right now, it was like 800 to 1,000 parts per million back then, which would result in enormous plants. Like, and it would also be, you can begin to see like the idea of Eden, in the sense that there would just be the plants would be so proliferate that you could just walk around and like there would be food everywhere, right? Yeah. There would be fruits and just like
so hunting and gathering was totally easy.
Totally easy, yeah. And like all the Indian legends about the deluge, the destruction that happens, they always say that like this, you know, the destruction took place, and then after that, surviving was hard.
Yeah.
Right. Before that, it was like easy. We like laid around, you know, we smoked our pipes and shit. Like if you got hungry, you just walked into the woods and pulled giant fruits off the trees, and you know. But after the cataclysm, living was hard. But also they said that people and things began to shrink. So something in the environment appears to have changed that resulted in, you know, the loss of the megafauna. Like the megafauna were killed off in extinction events, but there are still beavers, right? There are still mountain lions. They're just not as huge as they were before. So what appears to have happened with the humans, and the giant humans lasted a lot longer, and Jim Vieira they're speculating on this, is that the reason why they were able to last for so many thousands, like 10,000 years after the end of the Ice Age, before they really just completely faded away, is because their ancestors right afterwards had facilitated they had sort of tried to amplify this natural energy that used to be everywhere, but that was now very weak, but was still in certain places. Yeah. They tried to amplify it by using certain stone structures and shit like that. So the mounds and
we were talking about the telluric currents and all that kind of shit, and so
and it's known that like there are certain places on the planet that have been considered sacred for forever, and they're sacred for multiple reasons. Number one is that like people have just thought it was sacred for forever. Right. But the reason they think it's sacred is because many people have spiritual experiences there. In other words, that there's something about that spot. Yeah, there's some kind of energy going on there. And so people have been building stone structures, whether they're like, you know, uncut stone circles or massive Spanish cathedrals, whatever. That people have been building stone structures that harness sacred geometry. Yeah. In some way or another on those sites. To the point now where some of them are mounds because there's layers and layers and layers and layers of.
And then there's been some studies on the pyramid structure itself and how it focuses energy.
That's right.
All that kind of shit. So it's like you're getting at the idea that the people that actually lived in this environment were, say, technologically advanced to the point that when the Earth no longer naturally did it, they developed a way to maintain it enough to survive.
Right. When the Earth's ability to make it strong faded away, there was just like little sparks of it left in various places. They sort of amplified those sparks and then sort of stayed around the area where where they had built their amplifiers so that they would retain in some way they're formed, but over time they continue to shrink.
That's why you have these places where there's, like you're saying, there's just layers and layers and layers
That's right.
and layers upon layers of buildings from all different time periods.
That's right.
Where it's like that's where they were because they were able to amplify that.
That's right.
Environment.
And he talks
that
about
energy level.
Yeah, and he talks about like so the Earth's magnetic field itself is weakest at the equator and gets stronger as you approach the poles. Okay, so and it's fascinating. I can't remember what he called it, but there's some like scientific, not a law, but like somebody discovered this curious fact that the closer you get to the poles, the larger things tend to be.
Oh,
Okay,
shit.
so, and this is also true with the giants. When you see like when you're reading the giant reports, the farther north you get, or the farther south, like towards the tips of South America or up in Canada or whatever, they become enormous, right? So up in New York State, Vermont, they're like 12 feet tall or whatever. Farther south they get shorter. Well, it depends on how old they are too. Like the older they are, the taller they are as well.
Yeah. That's freaking fascinating.
Yeah. So like over time they shrank, and also north south. Like the closer to the equator they were, the smaller they tended to be.
I somehow this is connected to the fact that the pendulum.
I know, right? It's like somehow
we've been talking about like the way it moves at the poles.
That's right.
Is like is fixed to the distant.
Because like the closer you are to the pole, the more connected to the stars you are,
Yeah.
rather than the planet.
That's badass.
Like if you hang from space, you get tall.
Man, that's really cool. I would like to go into that some more. I'm going to look into that too, and maybe we can do some more on that whole area of topic or discussion next time.
So I'm still reading. I've just started this encyclopedia, so like by the time next week, I'll have gone through a whole bunch more of it. So I'm sure I'll have more to say.
Hey, I'll jump on the giant bandwagon with you, bro.
Sweet, giant bandwagon.
We can do another giant show.
We're going to have a gigantic show on the giant bandwagon. Is it a giant band wagon? So I think that's about it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. So
Russ changed his YouTube channel to Brothers of the Serpent.
Brothers of the Serpent.
But we're still not sure how to search for that, but you can give it a shot.
Yeah, my channel on YouTube is Brothers of the Serpent. Go find it. I don't know how to do it. I tried searching.
Look up some Jim Vieira stuff on Russ's YouTube channel.
Yeah. I think there's a channel search. So if you go to the channel search in YouTube and search for Brothers of the Serpent, you'll find it. But if you do the video search, if you try, you can. The best way to find any one of my videos, which will lead you to my channel, is I tried it at home. Because a lot of my videos are prefaced with that sort of like. So if you put I tried it at home, cell phone EMF or something like that, you'll find my video. So you guys can get a hold of us by emailing us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. You can go to the blog, which we're still working on. I mean, it looks cool, but it's not fully fleshed out. Hopefully, I'm going to find somebody who can work on that for me. I've got some prospects on that, but not yet. But anyway, you can go there. It's brothersoftheserpent.blogspot.com. You can put comments on the shows. You can post questions. You can post things that you guys want us to talk about. If you want to hear us discuss a particular subject, as long as it's not, politics. I mean, we'll do some. We kind of squeezed in there a little bit earlier in the show, but we try to avoid that topic for the most part, unless it's ancient politics is fine.
Because we want to piss everybody off.
That's right.
Not just
we're
like
trying to piss
a
off
certain
everybody.
portion of the population.
Right. I'm not going to be satisfied with pissing half of the population off. I want to piss off everyone.
That's right.
So I can't risk talking about politics and ingratiate half the population to me. And we want to say thanks to Laura for the intros, Smithsonic Studios, Aethern Productions, AWACS, RK, DCNSL, and all of you listeners out there. Thank you guys very much.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
Don't forget to go to iTunes and tell everybody we're badass. Give us 5 stars and an amazing review. That really does help at the very beginning. If you get enough of them, your podcast will climb to the top of its category briefly, and that massively increases its visibility for people. So any anyone that does that would help us out a lot. We're trying to spread this around to people we don't know.
If we don't know you, thanks for listening.
Yeah, if we don't know you, thanks for listening. If we do know you, go fucking give us a good review. And that's it for this show, ladies and gentlemen. Good night. Damu. Go find me some gold.
Dig up some giants. Snakes. Giant snakes.